Hello and welcome to The Big Conversation, the interactive show on PressTV that tackles the major issues of the week. I am Roshan Mohammed Salih. In the light of the repeated terrorist attacks on Turkey in recent days and months, we'll be asking, is Turkey reaping blowback for supporting terrorism? Over the next hour, we'll be talking to expert guests, but most importantly, we'll be taking your calls and comments on this issue. You can call me on +44 208 601 4555 to share your views. You can join the conversation on Twitter @TheBigConvo_PTV, and you can watch the show live on PressTV's Facebook page, and I promise I'll read out the best comments that you leave on there. But before we get stuck into our discussion, here's a reminder of the terror that's been afflicting Turkey and the context in which it's been happening.
An explosion believed to be caused by a car bomb in front of a courthouse in western Turkish city of Izmir today has wounded a number of people. Two of the suspected attackers were killed in an ensuing shootout with police. Several ambulances and police were dispatched to the scene. The explosion occurred near an entrance used by judges and prosecutors. On New Year's Day, 39 people were killed in a nightclub attack in Istanbul during festive celebration. ISIL claimed responsibility, citing Turkey's involvement in the Syrian war as a reason. Turkey has arrested a number of people of Uyghur ethnicity over the deadly attack, and the Deputy Prime Minister said authorities were closing in on the gunman, who he said was possibly an ethnic Uyghur. For several years, Turkey has adopted a policy of supporting anti-Damascus militants and letting them cross into the borders into Syria in an attempt to topple the Assad government. This has led many to accuse Turkey of directly supporting terrorism and destabilising a neighbour. Since last August, Turkey has itself invaded northern Syria, mainly to stop the Kurds from establishing a de facto state. The Turkish military and the Turkish-backed Syrian militant groups, some of which use the Free Syrian Army label, have been fighting against forces of ISIL, as well as against the mainly Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces. On a more positive note, Iran, Russia and Turkey have started a process of finding a political solution to the Syrian crisis. In a recent meeting in Moscow, all countries agreed that there is no military solution to the Syrian conflict, and the country's crisis can only be solved through political approaches. The nations are due to hold a follow-up meeting in Kazakhstan.
Okay, before I start taking your calls, I want to give you my take on this issue. I'm a regular visitor to the wonderful country of Turkey and have been so for the past 20 years. It's undoubtedly one of the great countries of the Middle East, and its physical beauty and the magnificence of its architecture and history is truly a wonder to behold. And in the past, I was always something of a fan of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who, despite many obstacles, managed to give voice to the Islamic sentiments of many of his people, as well as put the pro-Western, pro-NATO, pro-Israel Turkish military and secular establishment back into its box. But my opinion of President Erdogan changed the day he backed an armed uprising in Syria to topple a neighbouring government which has only ever had friendly relations with Ankara. No matter what you may think of any government in the world, only the state can have a monopoly on arms and weapons, because if it doesn't, that means that war, death and destruction isn't far away. Now, it's widely acknowledged that Turkey facilitated transit routes across its southern border and provided weapons for militants who sought to topple Bashar al-Assad, and some of those militants can only be described as terrorists. And indeed, those fighters helped destabilize Syria to such an extent that it created the conditions for an all-out war that has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. And that misguided policy has led Turkey from a situation in 2011 when it had zero problems with any of its neighbours to a situation now when it has loads of problems with many of its neighbours. What's more, after facilitating terrorists and helping to destroy a country, Turkey itself has now boots on the ground in northern Syria, mainly to stop the Kurds creating a de facto state, but also to dislodge ISIL from areas they want to control. Now, of course, all attacks on civilians are wrong, and the primary responsibility lies with those who commit these acts of terror. But if President Erdogan hadn't played with fire in the first place, would that fire now be consuming the Turkish mainland. That said, there may be signs that President Erdogan is finally returning to his senses. As we saw in the report, Turkey seems to be moving closer to Russia and Iran's position on Syria and away from its policy of war at all costs. And the sooner the major regional and international powers enforce a political deal in Syria, the better it will be for all concerned. Now, I'm going to shut up and move on to your calls, and I believe that we have an expert caller on the line. Recep Eksi is a political analyst. Oh, sorry, we haven't got a caller on the line, but perhaps we have some public callers we can go to? No? Okay, so the reminder of today's question, hopefully we'll get the phone line sorted out very soon and we can go to expert calls and public calls. A reminder that we're talking tonight about Turkey, the distressing situation in that country, which has been consumed by terrorist attacks for about a year now. We've had many attacks, too many to mention in fact, blamed on ISIL militants and also on Kurdish separatists. But I believe we can go to our expert caller now, who is Recep Eksi, who is a political analyst who focuses on Turkey and the Middle East. Recep, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. But if I can get straight down to it and ask you, who do you blame for the terrorist attacks that are currently taking place in Turkey?
That's hard to point out only one single perpetrator. We should not exclude the possibilities. In my opinion, number one suspect is NATO and the CIA. Turkey and the USA had a conflict of interest in Syria and Iraq. That started recently. They used to work together, but now, as Turkey sees the things developing against her interest, Turkey tried to move from the axis of West to Iran and Russia.
Yeah.
And since long time, Turkey first time took practical action rather than verbal actions. In 15 July coup d'etat attempts, Turkey was blaming USA, but it was just a blaming, just a verbal, but this is a real action in Syria issue and Iraq issue as well. We should also mention Iraq. Turkey is restoring ties with Iraq directly.
Yeah.
So Turkey sat down with Iran and Russia, and they discussed about future of Syria, finding political solution which is against American interest.
Yes.
America doesn't want this.
America was excluded from those talks.
The West doesn't want this, so that excluded them directly. And then if there is a political solution, America, USA, and the Western allies who started this destructive war against Syria will be, in fact, disappointed. So they want to, I think, they want to keep Turkey in
Recep,
their...
can I ask you, Recep, as a Turk yourself, can you give us a little bit of your insight into public opinion in Turkey? Do most Turks support President Erdogan's policy in Syria, or are they against it, or is opinion divided?
Well, opinions, I can say, divided. Yesterday, Deputy Prime Minister Numan Kurtuluş, he confessed that I was one of the person who believed that Syrian policy from beginning was there are many things wrong, and today one of the advisors, top advisor of the President Erdogan, he said that there are things going on. In fact, after impeachment, I should say impeachment of Ahmet Davutoğlu as a prime minister, so he resigned, but in fact he was forced to resign. And the government time to time confessed there has been things going on regarding Syrian issue. So the things developing on the ground is not interest of region, not interest of Turkey herself, but they were looking a way to out. They cannot come to public and say, okay, we did everything wrong. In fact, Bashar al-Assad is a good guy. They cannot say this. That's why what they are going to try to do, they try to go the other ways and then agreeing with Syria and Iran, even excluding. When they give statement,
Okay.
they exclude Iran. So, in reality, without Iran and Russia, there cannot be any
Solution in Syria. Yeah. My final question, Recep, is: do you feel that after 6 years of war, President Erdogan has finally changed his mind on Syria? His position has always been very firm that Bashar al-Assad must go before the war stops. Has he changed his mind now? Has he finally come to his senses?
I think he already has changed, and it's very clear that Bashar al-Assad will not go. Okay, and but Turkey cannot change. If they change mind, even cannot change this stance against Bashar al-Assad directly. I think Turkey needs time to change, because Turkey is not a country, so the Erdogan or the Prime Minister can make decision and okay, we don't want it, we don't want it, because there are a lot of Western interference in Turkish politics. So Turkey has changed mind maybe last 1 year, but implementation will take time. It
will take time. Okay, Recep Eksi, really appreciate your expertise and your comments. Thanks for joining us today. And I would just echo that you know, people need to disabuse themselves of this fantasy that Bashar al-Assad is going to step down from power or is going to leave power. You know, after 6 years of war, they tried everything, they threw everything. A coalition of countries from all over the world tried everything to take him down. He was never going to fall because he had support within Syria, and he also had support regionally from powerful actors and internationally. And he wasn't like Gaddafi, you know, somebody who didn't have any allies that could be taken down very easily. He wasn't like Saddam Hussein, again, somebody who didn't have allies who could be taken down easily. Bashar al-Assad will not leave power. You heard it here first. Actually, you didn't hear it here first. You should know it by now. All right, let's go to public callers. We have Rune in Denmark. Rune, we're asking tonight, is Turkey reaping blowback for supporting terrorism? Please go ahead and give us your opinion.
Well, firstly, I think that to start off, I will quote the Syrian president, because he said a while ago that terrorism wasn't just a play card you could, you know, put up and play with as you would like to yourself, and also that terrorism works like a scorpion, that it will sting you in the back when it has the opportunity. And that sort of portrays the policy that Turkey has been, or that Turkey have had towards Syria in particular the past couple of years. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that the policy towards Syria, or the Turkish policy towards Syria, can be sort of compared to the U.S. policy in the 80s towards Afghanistan, because they funded Islamist terrorists in the country of Afghanistan, primarily what later became the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Yeah. And also bin Laden, he received tremendous amounts of funds of the U.S. And sort of years passed on and they got hit in the back on 9/11. I think also it's sort of the same that's happening with Turkey and Syria right now. And it's also worth mentioning that even though the country of Turkey is, you know, as you said yourself in the start, a beautiful country, they sort of ruining it for themselves when they have the borders open for jihadist fighters to either enter Syria and also enter Turkey from Syria. I mean, when you have the border open without no control or no, armed guards to stop the jihadists from entering or going out of these two countries, you will get some sort of backlash when you harbor or fund terrorists that might later attack Turkey afterwards.
You raised a number of interesting points there, Rune. I mean, it is interesting. I think we're all looking back at history now and perhaps reassessing what we used to believe. I think, you know, when the Afghan conflict broke out in the 80s and Bosnia, you know, happened in the 90s, I think the instinctive reaction of many of us, and especially Muslims around the world, was to go to the aid of our Muslim brothers and sisters. And, you know, but in hindsight, after you've seen how they've taken down Iraq, Libya, and they tried to take down Syria. There seems to be a pattern emerging in the sense that perhaps these countries are actually just playthings. They're just pieces of the jigsaw. And the West's real enemy was not Afghanistan, it was Russia. The West's real enemy wasn't the Bosnian Muslims, it was the communist state of Yugoslavia. And sometimes I think that we're getting played. Thanks a lot for your comments, Rune, there in Denmark. Let's go on to Nasser in London. Nasser, as you know, we're talking about Turkey tonight, and we're especially looking at these horrific terrorist attacks which are taking place in Turkey all too frequently. Nasser, what would you like to say? Nasser just hung up the phone for some reason. Maybe he doesn't like me. I'll just expand on the point I was making about Afghanistan and Bosnia and the way that the West and countries like Turkey, unfortunately now, and Qatar and Saudi Arabia are using terrorists to further their geopolitical aims. I mean, I don't think Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey would be very happy to have people like Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda in Syria, and ISIL, and Ahrar al-Sham, you know, these terrorist groups that are operating in Syria. They wouldn't like them on their own soil. They wouldn't allow them to operate freely in their own soil because they know their ideology is extremist. They know that ultimately these guys are liver eaters and head choppers, and they would no way allow them to destabilize their home countries. But it's fine when they operate in countries they don't like Syria and other countries around the world. They've got absolutely no issue whatsoever with using them to further their geopolitical aims. But the fact is, and the problem is for these countries, that when those geopolitical aims are not fulfilled and those aims, those goals are not, you know, they don't succeed, then these guys come back to bite them. You know, they're like a Frankenstein's monster. I remember George Galloway used to describe them as that. These guys are a Frankenstein's monster. They are completely uncontrollable. They don't even particularly like Turkey. They consider Turkey, you know, a kafir state. You know, they consider the Turkish state to be a secular state, unbelievers. That's what they think the same thing about Syria. They think the same thing about Iran. They think the same thing about most non-Muslim and Muslim countries all over the world. And their aim is to take down these countries, and they can't be reasoned with. They can't be negotiated with around a table. Ultimately, the only language these guys understand is, you know, I don't want to sound like George Bush now, but the only countries these guys understand are, you know, is the language of force and the language of incarceration. And we also must tackle the Takfiri ideology at its roots to prevent people getting seduced by these people. You know, unfortunately, a lot of disenfranchised people with a gripe against Western society or even Muslim societies because there aren't opportunities for them, they get seduced by these Takfiri preachers and this, you know, fantastical fantasyland idea of a caliphate that will be, you know, some kind of utopia. Let's go to America now. We have a few more callers on the line. David, I believe, is in Los Angeles in the USA. David, as you know, we're talking about Turkey tonight. We're talking about terrorism in Turkey. What point would you like to make?
Yes, good evening. You know, first we should define terrorism very quickly. I'm not going to take too much of your time. Based on FBI definition, one can conclude that terrorism, any act like the war, is a terrorism. Basically, FBI defines terrorism acts dangerous to human life to affect the conduct of government by intimidation, coercion, or retaliation against government conduct. Now, you see, based on the FBI definition, one can conclude that war, occupation, invasion, toppling democratically elected government, support of dictatorship and tyranny are considered terrorism. Unknown about the future is the history we haven't read. That's Truman. The history shows us that Western colonial and imperialist government regimes with the leadership of the US and UK have been implementing these policies vigorously since World War II to maximize the rate of return for a wealthy and powerful minority in the West. Through supporting of tyranny, dictatorship, to rid people of their natural resources. Western powers, with the leadership of US and UK, use their puppet dictator allies such as Saudi, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, and Turkey to exert pressure on the regional independent native and governments, local governments who have independent policies.
Okay.
To put them in compliance. Now, the reason that's going into Turkey, because Turkey recently realized that if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Supporting terrorism, one-sided, is a matter of time to inflame your government. So withdrawal of Turkey from the old policy of supporting terrorism in Turkey and Iraq and the region is made him a victim to the same terrorism that is supported by his supporters.
Okay, David, thanks a lot for your comments. Let's move on to the next call. We have Yasser in Nigeria. I think this is going to be our last call before we take a few of your social media comments. Yasser, go ahead and make your point.
Oh, yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, Yasser.
Yeah, this is a vicious cycle. Turkey is becoming a puppet of the war against terror. Syria is supposed to be a brother to Turkey. I don't see any sense in Turkey trying to bring down a democratically elected president. Bashar al-Assad was elected by the Syrian government. And if he must go down, he must be got down by the Syrian government. So Turkey, US, Saudi Arabia have no business in bringing down Bashar al-Assad. That's why they will never succeed, because he was elected by the Syrian government. And if the people in Syria are not happy with Bashar, they have their ways of dialogue with him, not by other external forces coming to destroy the country. Because look, the mosque has been destroyed. Syria is still standing. Those people are very loyal to their country, to their. It's not about even Bashar al-Assad. It's about their own pride as a country. So this is to prove that this country is a very strong country that will never go down, except if.
Okay, yes, sir. Thanks a lot for your comments. I'm going to cut you off, but I agree wholeheartedly. The Syrian government is far from perfect, but the answer to better the government is not an armed uprising in the country which destroys the whole country and pits Syrian against Syrian. It's reform. Okay, I think we can go to a few social media comments to just end this half of the show. Let's go to the comment wall. Hopefully we can get the first comment on by Saladin at Hater of ISIS. What a great hashtag, or sorry, Twitter handle. RIP to the souls lost in Izmir today. Someday the world will know true peace and terrorism will be past tense someday. Unfortunately, I think terrorism has got a long way to go. As long as countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and the West are supporting it to achieve their geopolitical aims, I don't see terrorism going away. At Portos, I'll forget about that. At PJ, let me call him that. Every nation knows that all Islamic terrorism is financed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey, so why not take them to the UN Security Council? I object to the term Islamic terrorism because it's not Islamic, it's nothing to do with Islam. Why don't you take them to the UN Security Council? Well, we all know the UN Security Council is a plaything of Western countries, apart from Russia and China, or the UN generally is, and Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Qatar are allies of the West, so I don't think that route is going to be very fruitful. Donald J. Trump, the next leader of the free world. I condemn the terrorist attack against innocent people in the nightclub in Istanbul, USA. With Turkey, we will win against the terrorism. Well, I don't know what Donald Trump's going to do in terms of his foreign policy. I'm confused like everyone else. Is he going to be less interventionist, or is he going to be more interventionist? Is he going to be friends with Russia? Is he going to be enemies with Iran? I think we have conflicting messages. I'm not going to read out that last tweet because we're running out of time. To be honest, I'm as confused as anybody else. I hope and pray that he will be less interventionist. We have to go away because we'll be back in a few minutes taking more of your calls on tonight's question. Is Turkey reaping blowback for supporting terrorism? Just a reminder, you can call me on +44 208 601 4555 to share your views. You can join the conversation on Twitter at @thebigconvo_PTV. And you can watch the show live on PressTV's Facebook page. And I promise I'll read out the best comments that you leave on there. See you again in a few minutes' time. Welcome back to the big conversation. In the light of the repeated terrorist attacks on Turkey in recent days and months, we're asking, is Turkey reaping blowback for supporting terrorism? We've been talking to expert guests, but most importantly, we've been taking your calls and comments on this issue. Now, you can call me on +44 208 601 4555 to share your views. You can join the conversation on Twitter at @thebigconvo_PTV. And you can watch the show live on PressTV's Facebook page. And I promise I'll read out the best comments that you leave on there. But before we get back into the calls, here's a reminder of what Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had to say about the recent terror attacks.
As we were in excitement of entering a new year with new hope, terror targeted our country in the lowest, most treacherous and insidious of ways. A terrorist raided an entertainment centre located in Istanbul's Ortaköy neighbourhood in the early hours of 2017. He massacred 39 people, including foreign guests of ours, and wounded 71 people. Accusing Turkey, the country that's putting up the most effective fight against ISIL, of supporting this lowly organisation is a discourse that is desired by those who attack Turkey through these terrorist organisations. Those who claim the contrary, they have to come up with substantial examples. Let me state once again, nobody's lifestyle is under systematic threat in Turkey. We will never allow that. We did not let this happen during our governance of 14 years. As the president of all of our 79 million citizens, it is my duty to protect everybody's rights, as well as their area of freedom. In Syria, we are preparing a new initiative to end our Al-Bab operation at short notice. God willing, this will be dealt with soon. We are determined to cleanse other regions where terror organisations are holed up, starting with Manbij. There is also hope regarding our work together with Russia to achieve a permanent ceasefire in Syria and to find a political solution to the disagreements.
Okay, so tonight we are asking, we're talking about Turkey. We're talking about the recent horrific terrorist attacks on Turkey that are maiming civilians on the streets of Izmir, on the streets of Istanbul, on the streets of Ankara. We are asking, why is this happening? Is there a direct link with the Syrian war in which Turkey has been so intimately involved since the beginning, supporting an armed uprising against a neighbour, Damascus, which has never ever attacked Turkey in any conceivable way? President Erdogan and President Assad used to get on very well together, but not anymore. Not since Erdogan tried his best by using terrorists to attack Syria. We have a caller online, Danny in Marbella, in southern Spain, I believe. Danny, if you can go ahead and make your point, please. We're talking about Turkey. Why is terrorism happening in Turkey? Go ahead.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. And I'd just like to say that it's a situation of the chickens coming home to roost. You know, you reap what you sow. And Turkey systematically have been indirectly and directly, there's certain evidence to point to that as well, funding terrorist groups such as ISIS. We know it's well documented that, for example, Turkey have bought oil from ISIS. ISIS fighters, when they've been arrested by Iraqi forces and Syrian forces, even admit to being trained and even armed indirectly within places inside Turkey. And, it's blowback. It is systematic blowback. And we see this repeated in history before. For example, when the USA funded the Mujahideen, and then they end up it's returned to them in the force of Osama bin Laden. So it's something which does have blowback, and all actions have consequences. In fact, even Joe Biden actually last year said that Turkey have enabled the expansion of ISIS by turning a blind eye to the vast smuggling of networks of weapons and fighters during the Syrian war. So if the Vice President of the United States is saying something of that magnitude, I think really if the establishment is talking in the same language as us, then it's pretty significant.
Yeah. I think we've got very intelligent callers tonight because you're all drawing parallels between previous wars in the Muslim world, especially perhaps in the ex-Yugoslavia and in Afghanistan, where we see this pattern emerging of the West supporting certain groups. They call them freedom fighters. And in a way, these fighters did have genuine grievances, whether it was against their own governments or against foreign powers. But nevertheless, they do seem to be pawns in a wider game. I'll let you come in, Danny, just to finish your point. Do you agree with that? Are they pawns in a wider game?
No, I absolutely agree with that, and you couldn't have put it better. But ultimately, this is deeply rooted in the overall greater policy that Turkey have for the Middle East, in cahoots with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and maybe a few of the other powers, which is the toppling of Bashar al-Assad. Now, Assad may not be a perfect leader, but it is sort of an illegitimate and illegal action to try and oust him, and they've tried to do this by exploiting this conflict, which is not a civil war, which we know that. It's fighters, radicalized fighters coming from all over the Middle East and being backed by these Gulf nations, including Turkey, to try and topple him. So, yes, I agree with you.
Perfect. Really appreciate your call and your comments, Danny. That was a great call. And I would just reiterate that, governments all around the world, they need to stop using terrorism to take down their enemies. I always give the example of Saudi Arabia. I am intrinsically in my soul anti-Saudi in every conceivable way, but I would no way back an armed uprising in Saudi Arabia to destroy a country, because that's exactly what happens. It destroys a country, it turns people against people, and it creates generational hatred. It doesn't solve any problems whatsoever. So reform, has to be a slow process, and a process which happens internally in that country, not engineered from outside the country. Okay, I'm glad to say that we can go to Canada now, to a friend of mine, Maksud Javidov. Thank you very much, Maksud, for calling in. Assalamu alaikum, nice to speak to you again. Maksud, let's get straight into it. Why is terrorism happening in Turkey? What's your take on it?
Well, like your previous guest, I would just briefly like to refer to history. If we remember, during the Soviet aggression against Afghanistan, the United States allocated a particular role to Pakistan, and that role was to facilitate the so-called pseudo-jihadi movement, which was rooted in the Khawarij Saudi ideology. So today, Turkey is essentially fulfilling the same role for the United States as Pakistan did during the Soviet aggression against Afghanistan. And we see today how Pakistan is suffering. Now, if we take the Turkish position strictly from the Turkish state national interest, it makes no sense for Turkey to take the position it took on Syria. The trade between 2006 and 2009 almost doubled between Syria and Turkey. The relations were good. The tourism doubled. Syria and Turkey were becoming major trade partners. So the question is, why did Turkey take the position it took? Now, that's a thing we have to understand the U.S. policy in the region. Now, U.S. is an empire in decline, and it understands that it can no longer control the region in the same manner as it did pre-Arab Spring. So what it wants to do, the policy is, if we don't control it, nobody will. So that hoping that one day they will be asked to return back to the region. So Turkey took a very illogical position by becoming the Pakistan for the United States in Syria, and today, unfortunately, we see this, criminal terrorism that is, raising its head almost everywhere in the world.
Maksud, Erdogan, as we saw in an earlier report, he would say that he moved into Syria to stop people getting slaughtered, ultimately. to go to the help of his Muslim brothers and sisters who are getting slaughtered. And his policy has always been that Bashar al-Assad must go. There can be no peace in Syria until Bashar al-Assad goes. What would you say to that? And do you think that he has changed that position?
Now, here's the thing. If Erdogan was really concerned about the slaughter of Muslims and Sunnis, now Gaza has been bombarded, occupied, Palestine has been bombarded, occupied for decades. How come Turkey and other U.S. regional surrogates, they do not facilitate the means for the Palestinian people to resist occupation? So this whole nonsense about saving our Sunni brothers in Syria, well, what about the Sunni brothers in Palestine? I mean, the tragedy of the Syrian thing is that the NATO alliance has played the sectarian card very well, but today, thank God, due to rise of like a movement in Turkey, Furkan Vakfı, led by Alparslan Kultu, who's a prominent Sunni scholar and activist. And this movement has taken a very non-sectarian position on Syria. So hopefully this sectarian card will no longer be the main tool in Turkey.
Maksud, I'm just going to ask you one final question, and if you can be quite brief, if possible, because you have other calls on the line. Do you think the Syrian war is coming to an end? We have Russia, Iran, and Turkey meeting in Moscow. They're going to meet in Kazakhstan soon again. Do you foresee a political solution, a ceasefire political solution happening anytime soon?
It's a hard question to answer. The political solution has to happen, but we have to see what Donald Trump does after he becomes president, because Donald Trump's presidency is like a monkey with a gun. So you don't know what he's going to do. So it all depends on that. So hopefully he follows through at least with this electoral promise, and that was basically siding with the Russian position on Syria.
Okay, Maksud, I'm not sure if we have other calls on the line, whether I can continue this conversation or not, but I think we'll leave it there. Maksud Javidov in Canada. I did neglect to mention that Maksud is the deputy editor of anti-orientalist.com, so please do go ahead and visit that website, and you can read their illuminating commentary. We have Abbas in Michigan. I think I know Abbas, actually. Thanks for calling into the show, Abbas. I hope you're well. We're talking about Turkey tonight. Is Turkey reaping blowback for supporting terrorism? What's your take on that, Abbas?
Yes, hello, Roshan.
Hi.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I definitely feel that they are feeling blowback, for their support of terror in Syria. I mean, they built this whole infrastructure in an effort to topple President Assad, and they failed. And now they're feeling the blowback from this. Obviously, Erdogan, realizing that he's failed in Syria, is taking a step back from them and stopping the support for the terrorists.
Do you think
they're not happy with him and seeking revenge on him? And I don't think it will stop with Turkey only. I think eventually these terrorists will seep back into Europe and elsewhere in the West, and I think the whole West will feel blowback from this infrastructure.
Well, that's actually a point that no one's made so far tonight, Abbas. I'm glad you have made it. So you don't think that it's going to be confined to Turkey, it's going to spread into Europe. But what I would say, I talked about this on a previous show, is that the terrorism that exists in the West against America, for example, where you're talking from, or Great Britain or France, it's not really an existential threat. It's a terrorism issue, it's bloody, it kills people, but it's not going to bring down the state. But the terrorism threat which exists in the Middle East, it literally is an existential threat to countries like Syria and Iraq, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I think Erdogan also will face consequences for this because, eventually if people are being blown up in these terrorist attacks, they'll hold him responsible. Because, they voted him to be the president of Turkey, not to be the Khalifa of the Ummah and support the international jihad. So once, these, innocent civilians are being killed in Turkey with these terrorist attacks, I think eventually they'll hold him responsible.
Thank you very much, Abbas, there in Michigan. USA for that call. And I think you're right. I think ultimately this alliance between Erdogan and perhaps ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra, other FSA-linked groups in Syria, it was always a bit of a tactical alliance. They never saw eye to eye completely. It was just a marriage of convenience in the sense that they used each other to achieve various goals. But now that that marriage is breaking apart, what you're seeing is the fallout, and both will blame each other. And I think the consequences are going to be very bloody indeed. Let's go back to the United Kingdom now. Rafiq is in Leicester, which is a city in, I think you describe it as the South Midlands. Rafiq, we're talking about Turkey tonight. Is Turkey reaping blowback for supporting terrorism? Go ahead and make your point, please.
Yeah, you're talking about terrorism in Turkey. Yeah, it was expected anyway, because as you know, Turkey plays two games at a time. I call it double standard, combined with America. And he's going to pay for what he's been doing. I mean, if he's supporting one person and knocking the other one's going to knock him down. And so it's nothing new. And I've been watching all this news from the start as the war started in Syria. America's always been upper hand is because of Israel. And to keep Israel in power, he's going to do anything to look at the situation. Yemen's knocked out. Syria's knocked out. And Iraq is knocked down, so who's there to fight with Israel and loading with the weapons and everything to make him a superpower? And now he wants to go for Iran and things like that. So you can quite see clearly that they just want Israel to be in power. Why nobody wants to attack Israel? If it's ISIL, the Muslims and whatever, not one bullet's gone to Israel.
I think, Rafi, what we do as human beings, because most people are nice people and we have good hearts, and when we see people getting killed or repressed, that pulls on our heartstrings, doesn't it? But ultimately, these great powers, they don't care about human rights. They care about wealth and power. And they will use human rights as a fig leaf to basically, launch their wars and get public support for the military-industrial complex, which makes money from these wars and ultimately thrives on war. But was it ever thus? Thank you very much, Rafiq in Leicester. Now let's go to the African continent in Tanzania and another Abbas talking from Tanzania. Thanks for calling us. Is Turkey reaping blowback for supporting terrorism, Abbas? Go ahead.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so we're talking about Turkey tonight, and we're asking whether Turkey is reaping blowback for supporting terrorism. Lots of terrorist attacks in Turkey happening today in Izmir, last week in Istanbul. Why are these attacks happening, Abbas? Go ahead.
Yes, Turkey now may decide to draw back after that it has understood that what it started as initial, it was wrong. Because as you said from the earlier point, it was in a very peaceful state at before, and then it suddenly started switching on into these kinds of issues, poking itself into the matters of Middle East. It had to realize from before, why did he have to put himself, herself, in these matters? This was nothing doing with her. It was in a very peaceful condition. Why did it go into this? This is a question we need to look into.
Was it peaceful? I mean, there was a kind of uprising happening, wasn't there, in Syria when he went in? It wasn't entirely peaceful, was it?
Yes, it was, but true. Why did it have to go there? Syria had its own problems. The problems in Syria were internal. Why did Turkey get into it? Syria had its own problem. It had to be solved by itself. Everybody knows the country's problem within itself should be solved by itself. Nobody has to interfere in there.
Okay, point taken, point well made. Point well made and point taken, Abbas. Thanks a lot. Let's go to our final call, I think, of the night. Nasser is in London. Nasser, I think we tried to get you on the phone a bit earlier on, but you hung up or the line got cut, I'm not sure. Anyway, Nasser, we're talking about Turkey. Is Turkey reaping the blowback for supporting terrorism? Why are these terrorist attacks happening in Turkey? Go ahead and make your point, please, Nasser.
Yes, good evening, and good evening to the listeners. Well, I was asking a question. I was asking to myself a question. Why it's not happening in Greece, which is next door, in Italy, in Switzerland, in Austria? Now, this is what happened. What goes round comes round. Now, every takfiri went through Turkey to Syria and Iraq. and this is the double standard now. Who wants to hurt civilians? In which name? In any religion is forbidden. So this is the work. Basically, this is the work. Payback, destabilize Turkey. Could be by the enemy of peace, which all we know, and people get scared to name them, the Zionists.
Yeah.
So this is the work. I think it's nothing to do with the. It could be the inside job just to get rid of the Kurdistan and to to make Erdogan stronger, even stronger, because he
Nasser, I'm going to cut you off. You made your point, and sorry for keeping the call so short, but I want to get a few of your Facebook comments in, because people have been watching the show on Facebook tonight. They have been leaving comments on our Facebook thread. I did promise I'd read some comments out, so let's go to the comment wall. Hopefully we can just get some Facebook comments on that wall. I can read them out. Abdullah Ali, ditching the axis of evil has its consequences, especially after courting them for some time. They are hitting back at Turkey for quitting their club. I think it's going to get nastier. The axis of evil, I don't know. I'm not even completely sure what Abdullah Ali means by this. Ditching the axis of evil. Yeah, I'm sorry, Abdullah. I don't know what you mean by that, so I can't really comment on it. Persia Ali, if you play with fire, you are bound to get burned, and we can see this is happening now to those countries that have done this. Yeah, I think that's the point that's been made repeatedly around this show. Erdogan has played with fire. He's played with these terrorists, now he's fallen out with these terrorists, and now these terrorists are coming back to hurt him. That's basically, in a nutshell, what's happening in Turkey. Omid Siddiqui, the truth is that ISIS was created in Iraq in 2006. Yeah, that's correct. It was US which occupied Iraq, not Syria. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was in American prisons. I think it was Camp Cropper. So who created ISIS, Syria or the US? Yeah, so Bashar al-Assad gets blamed a lot for creating ISIS. I believe that is a complete conspiracy theory. It's not true at all. In fact, Bashar al-Assad at times hasn't fought ISIS because he's been fighting everyone else in the world, but he has directly engaged ISIL as well. But the fact is that the destabilization of Iraq and Syria, that is what has given ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra, other terrorist groups room to thrive. That's all the time we have today. Thank you to our guests and to you especially for calling in the show and sending us your comments. Some great calls and talking points tonight, and please continue the conversation on our Facebook page. We'll be back next week with more on whatever the biggest talking point of the week is. Bye-bye.